There are basically two approaches to tax reform. One is to clean up the existing system. The other approach is to create new taxes, like a value-added tax or a climate change tax. And frankly, we ought to be doing both of those.
This is At Brookings, a weekly in-depth look at issues behind the news. This week, taxes and tax reform.
Taxes on income, payroll, goods and services. They're often dreaded, frequently maligned, but necessary to pay for the many programs and services the government provides. What's also necessary, experts say, is tax reform, a restructuring of the system to make it equitable, to shrink the deficit, and to make filing easier for taxpayers. It's a major challenge, says Economic Studies Senior Fellow William Gale, a vocal advocate for comprehensive tax reform.
Bill, is tax reform absolutely necessary?
There are all the usual reasons for tax reform. First of all, the system is too complicated. Second, it's thought to be unfair. There's concern at the low end that a very large proportion of Americans are not paying any income tax. There's concern at the high end that a lot of high-income people are avoiding the tax, or certainly are paying less taxes, substantially lower taxes than they would have with the income they have now, but with the tax system of 20, 30 years ago. And there's concerns about how it affects the economy, in particular on the corporate tax rate. If we want the economy to perform better, we should develop a tax system that is more conducive to economic activity. So there are all those reasons. Then there's a whole second set of reasons, which are a variety of things that are not thought to be tax issues, but actually have tax answers.
Are there tax proposals that might affect climate change?
If there ever were a case for a corrective tax, taxing carbon emissions, greenhouse gas taxes is just a first order priority, or at least it ought to be. And there are even things like the financial crisis, which people don't think of as a tax issue, and I certainly don't want to say it was caused by tax policy, but tax policy made it worse through the mortgage interest deduction, which encouraged people to take out larger loans and higher loan-to-value ratios and make lower down payments.
We recently saw the passage of health care reform. How does this factor into our tax system? What's the interaction between the two?
We missed a big potential change in the health care reform by not reforming the employer deduction for health insurance. That's an enormous subsidy to health insurance. It's expensive, it's regressive, it encourages overconsumption of health care. We could have eliminated that or reformed that. That was a missed opportunity that's still on the table.
Why is tax reform such a politicized issue?
We had a major comprehensive reform in 1986, which was able to get over a lot of the political hurdles by essentially making a grand deal. That the deal was basically we would cut out a lot of the special exemptions and loopholes and stuff. In exchange for that, we would lower the top rate to 28%. Since then, that deal has eroded. Rates have gone back up. There are a huge number of new special, subsidies and exclusions in the system. And what it's going to take to get back to that type of system with a sort of taxing everything, or taxing all forms of income at a relatively low rate, is another grand political deal, and we just don't have the way of getting to that in the Congress right now. I think the political dynamic is just such that neither side's willing to compromise.
Senators Wyden and Gregg have introduced a bipartisan tax reform plan. Is this a good start?
Wyden and Gregg have a proposal that's bipartisan, and it's actually tax reform. It's not just a tax cut. And so that's two very important steps in the direction that we need to head. I won't say the bill is perfect. No bill is ever perfect, but it gets those two things exactly right. It's bipartisan and it's reform. But even if we do that, we will still need to raise additional revenue through some other tax, like a value-added tax, because Wyden and Gregg is a revenue-neutral reform, and we need not just better taxes, we need increased revenues.
Bill, you've said that one of the key ways to close the federal deficit is to deal with our tax system. So what's the connection there?
We have big deficits in the short term. We have big deficits in the next 5 to 10 years, and we have big deficits after that. So although we have big deficits at each stage, they're actually very different problems and very different issues that come up. In the short term, right now, we think the big deficit is a good thing. It's helping the economy, it's stimulating demand, it's helping accelerate the recovery. So it's not, the big deficit right now is not a concern in and of itself. Over the next 5 to 10 years, even as the economy returns to full employment, we're looking at deficits of 5 to 6% of GDP. Those would be the highest full employment deficits since the Second World War, except for this past year. And that's a sign that the budget is just out of whack. What we're willing to tax ourselves is just not consistent with the spending that we want to have. So over the next 5 to 10 years, the issue is how do you close that gap? It's going to be very hard to close that gap on the spending side. 70% of federal spending is on one of 5 things: net interest, defense, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And for a variety of reasons, none of those are likely to be cut anytime soon.
Bill, thank you so much for your time here today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Gigi Hinton. See you again next week.
At Brookings is produced by the Brookings Institution. To learn more about the issues discussed on At Brookings, visit our website at brookings.edu.